Welcome back to Thinksipwrite. I know it's been a little bit of a delay. I apologize for that. I've been coaching baseball and doing voice work for an actual video game and dodging pumpkin everything. September hits and everything's pumpkin. This episode, I wanted to talk about the writing process, what I typically do, what some of the failures and successes are of the whole process, because I've gotten some questions about that. So I'll start off, and anybody that has questions or comments, please feel free in the comments section or feel free to contact me, and I'll obviously add that on later. It all begins with the brainstorming process. Now, the concepts usually come when I'm coming up with them. I'm driving in a car or I'm doing any number of things. In the middle of the night, I keep a pad next to the bed. A lot of ideas come from dreams. Some people don't get them that way. But basically what you got to do is you got to take down the notes, and I actually sit and I outline everything. And the outline's subject to change. I will sit and I will the series that I was currently working on there's 10 chapters a book plus a prologue and an epilogue. And in each chapter, it's got to be outlined individually. A lot of times you have to have, as a writer, a beginning and an end. You know where you're going to begin. You know where you want the book to end. You just have to basically fill everything in the middle. That's the hardest part of it, is finding the meat and the source material and actually making it sound good. As you go, it gets a little bit difficult to keep with what your original concept was, other than the core idea of it. And so I'll get to chapter 3, and by the time I get to that point, chapter 6 is no longer what I wanted it to be. But I keep some of the basic ideas. You want your core ideas there. Now, dialogue is one of the hardest things. You can have everything from cheesy dialogue to really good dialogue. It depends on what you're trying to do. Dialogue is something I come up with in the car. I sit in the car and I'll drive and I'll have my phone on audio and I'll just record. And I'll sit there and I'll talk to myself, and everybody driving by thinks that I'm a nutcase talking to myself. But that's kind of what I'm doing right now. So I actually do it in character voices. I will sit there and make up my own. I'll do everything from a terrible accent to my own voice with a little bit harsher sound to it, kind of like a Batman scary thing. But it gives me the idea in my head when I go back and play it, what the actual characters might sound like if they're female. Next comes the writing. Like I said, you get to chapter 3 and it might be completely different than what you originally envisioned as far as the meat of it. And I'll sit and I'll go and I'll edit as I go. But once I sit down at that keyboard and I start typing, it flows. If you've well thought everything out, you can pretty much sit down and just go. Typical planning for me takes about 3 months from concept to actual writing step. So a lot of the times I will be in the middle of writing a book and I'll be thinking about the next book or even 2 books later to come up with these ideas. It's something that can't be done immediately. A lot of people want to write a book and they want to sit down and they just want to type and make it happen, and it doesn't happen that way. Even best-selling authors don't do it that way. They have an idea ahead of time, they sit down, and then it happens. By the time you get to the end of your book, before you give it off to anybody, such as an editor or a reviewer, what you want to do is you want to go back and you want to reread it yourself. You may think that this whole thing, and a lot of times I'll do it and I'll write it and I'll get to the end and I'll go back and I'll start listening, or I'll start reading what I did, and I'll get to a point and go, I don't know what I was thinking at that point, and it needs to be changed. So feel free to adjust. Dialogue, storytelling, descriptions of things can never hurt to be descriptive. Even Tom Clancy, if you've read any of his work, he's very, very descriptive. Actually, he's a little too descriptive for me, and I love his stories, but he gets down to the point where it's almost like he's describing a bolt that's in the side of a submarine. You know, it's a little too descriptive. I like to find a medium in between with the authors that I read. So that's kind of what I try to portray. When I'm writing, I try to portray something that I would like to see on a TV screen or at a movie. I try to give it that type of feel. So after you've done your rewrites, you want to find, I would say, at least one, typically 3 beta readers. Okay, and these got to be people that you want to trust. Obviously you have to have your work copywritten before you go giving it off to somebody you don't typically know or trust. But what you want to do is you want to get their idea on it, and you want them to be honest. You don't want to give it to your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whatever and have them just go, oh, this is great, because you know what? If they're not being honest to you, then it beats the whole purpose of having a beta reader. Beta readers are the people that get to see the raw meat and potatoes of the book before it's edited, or even after it's edited, but before it's published. And they're supposed to give you honest feedback and take criticism well. I sometimes didn't take criticism too well, and years later I finally realized the error in my ways early on, and it led to me having a successful music career for a while. But you need to be able to take that criticism, and sure, sometimes it might hurt a little bit because you didn't feel like you did it right, but it pays off to listen to the criticism and correct your mistakes. There's things that I did, and I know Flesh and Leftovers was my first novel. I still get fan mail about that, about how awesome it was. But when I go back and I read it, I see things wrong with it that I wanted to change. Things that at that time, I didn't have enough editors looking at it. So it's a learning curve, and you gotta be able to adapt and change to not just culture as a whole, but to even what you're doing. The second that you say or believe that you have made it as an author or as anything, that's the second you fail. When you believe that you can't get any better, it's when you fail. I've seen top authors suddenly fall and not do anything. Musicians, they've done it. You can't let ego get in the way of everything. If you've done something and you're really proud of it, that's great. You should be proud of everything you do, but don't get to the point where you're so wrapped up in your own ego that you think you can't do any better. You can. So finally, then you get to the editing process, and I have currently 3 editors. So each of them will give me feedback, and they will also correct a lot of the problems that I've had. I'm terrible at some grammatical errors. I'm actually really decent at writing English, and then all of a sudden I find out that I don't know how to use a comma. And my main editor just constantly is sending me links on how to properly use a comma. And I'll read them, and I'll take them to heart. And then I'll write another book, and I'll adjust. And then all of a sudden I'm realizing I'm doing something different with the commas. Commas are my weakness. They're like my kryptonite. After you've corrected everything, make sure you read it again yourself. Now, what you want to do at that point is, if you're submitting to publishers or you're going to do self-publishing, which at this point I've seen New York Times bestsellers go the way of self-publishing, because you can actually market and do things the way you want as long as you have editors in there and people with positive or negative feedback. Then you know exactly what you're going to hit. It's just a matter of you doing it yourself instead of the publishers. It's freedom of material. You could pitch your stories to Hollywood, and I actually had my first trilogy out there, and they told me flat out, we can't make this into a movie. We need to make this into something like a TV series. Now, to me, that was great, but unfortunately, the movie and the TV worlds don't often communicate to each other, so no one there at that point had the connections for who would take over. Make sure it's copywritten. Do not publish unless you own the copyright to it. And there's also copyrights around the world. Just because you're copywritten here in the United States or wherever you're actually watching this from, you have to read the guidelines. You might not be copywritten in Japan. So if you're publishing through Amazon or something like that, make sure you have worldwide rights to your own work. You don't need to find out a couple years later that somebody in some foreign country that is not your own has made your work into theirs as a movie and has gotten success out of it. Because guess what? At that point, if you don't own the rights, you're done. Marketing. How do you market? Social media. I can't express enough how awesome social media is. It has worked for my wife. It has helped me sell books. I just can't emphasize how good social media is. If you're not on Twitter, as annoying as Twitter can be, you got to kind of learn a little bit about it. Instagram, especially for authors, is great. Even if you're sitting there having a cup of coffee and you put up something and use your hashtags, hashtags get annoying. You could sit there for 20 minutes putting hashtags up. It doesn't matter. It works. Also, giveaways. When you have your release dates, don't be afraid to give away your books. And if you're setting the price of your books, don't overprice them. Digital, everything's kind of pushing more that way. I still am a person who loves to have a print copy in my hand. That's how I read my books. Although now, because of the writing, I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks, and there's another format. You're going to have an audience in each specific area. So don't be afraid to give away 10 or 15 copies of your books. Give them to people and then tell them, look, when you're done, go put in a review up on Amazon. I use Amazon for my digital books. I use Lulu, which is a great self-publishing. I've been using them for years. I use them for my print books. And you can distribute to Barnes & Noble and all the other distributors through those two sites. Reviews are the most important. I can't tell you how much feedback, and if you're following me on Instagram or Twitter or even Facebook, I put up this past week a fan mail that I got, and it made my day. He was asking about a character in one of my books, and obviously I can't give away too much to him, but what I did was, I responded to him, and then I put it back up because it really did make my day that day. I haven't seen a whole ton of reviews on Amazon, so the few that are there are great. But what you got to do is you got to try to get people to review. And as an author myself, I've found myself reading books and going, oh, that was a great book, and I'll write about it, and I'll tweet about it or whatever, and then I'll go back and I'll go, oh man, 6 days later I'll go, I didn't review that on Amazon or anything. So then I got to go back and I got to go do that. And it's very important. If I'm a firm believer in do unto others. If you're a reader, if you're a writer, you're a reader. If you're a reader and you're not reviewing the work, it's kind of a disservice to the author. So you want to kind of give them an honest opinion, even if it's a terrible opinion. And you'll get haters. Don't worry about the haters, because you know who the haters are, and everybody can tell who they are. They're just people that want attention. 9 times out of 10, if your work is decent, you're not getting a hater, and you can't let any of that get to you. But even for those people who are just trying to cause drama, take some of that in. It's constructive criticism if you've got a positive outlook on everything. Be honest with yourself. If you think your work's a piece of crap, it's a piece of crap. If the author doesn't believe in what he or she is doing, it's not worth putting out. It's not worth the time and effort on your part or anybody else's to do it. So make sure you're confident in what you are doing. Don't think that your first book is going to make millions of dollars. Don't think that your first book is going to make thousands or even hundreds of dollars. You may get a lot of sales on it that cover your costs. You may feel like it's a success to you. And if you do, that's great. But don't think that you're getting into it going, oh, I'm going to be on the bestseller list because this is great. You could have the greatest thing. Your first book is not going to do that well. If it does, you're one of the very few authors that actually get recognition from their first book. Stephen King didn't get recognition that much from his first book, not the way he is now, or even was a few years ago. It wasn't until I published my 4th book that I started getting really, really good feedback as far as I had people contacting and writing a few reviews here and there, but I actually got into the top 100 and top 25 lists of independent authors. Don't go into it believing that you're going to, and if you don't get disheartened by it. Just keep going. Don't let it stop you. If you have a passion for writing, do it. If you have a passion for reading and you can't write, find somebody you might want to work with if you have an idea for a story. Anyway, that's enough time for this. I'm sure I've rambled on enough. I just wanted to get into this. I thought it was a cool topic. Again, I apologize for being so long, but I will have another episode up soon. I'm not doing a slideshow in this episode because I feel it's just self-explanatory. So have a good night, good day, whatever. Cheers.